one and only John McMullen set to join us here on the Sports Bash as we look at a ton of NFL news notes. And, of course, yesterday's sports betting was a big topic of conversation, and it is kind of furthered today, John, with the NFL, with, of course, a lot of people talking about what's next. By the way, sports gambling, it looks like in New Jersey, will begin this month at Monmouth. They hope to be ready for the NBA Finals. And shortly after that, of course, the football season will be here, John. But there's a lot of people who think that sports betting might force the NFL to use full-time officials and more replay, and really the intricacies and the fallout from this decision could really be presented on the field big time.
Well, I'm all for full-time officials. I've been advocating for that for many, many years, and I think it's absurd that an industry that makes as much money as they do has had part-time officials. Now, they've started the past few years, they've hired a few full-time, but there's no reason that everybody shouldn't be full-time, and there's plenty of work to be done. That was always one of the arguments that, well, what are they going to do in the off season? But you see the constant stream of rookie camps and OTAs and mini camps. You should have officials on field at all of those things for a number of reasons, to teach the players how you're going to call the game, which would improve the product. And obviously, you know, coaches always say the best thing to improve players is repetition. Well, the best thing to improve anything is repetition, and that includes officials. So the more they're doing it, the better they will get at it. That kind of thing I would applaud, and if legal gambling pushes them towards that line, I think it's a positive. On the other hand, do we really need more replay? I think that would be a disaster for the game. So,
if you're taking an integrity fee, you better make sure you're getting these calls 100% or as close to them right?
Yeah, but it's impossible in a game where it's subjective. And by the way, they keep making it more subjective with the new helmet rule. And now news comes out, as I predicted and we talked about on the show many times. I don't think they're going to call it as it was originally intended or written when they announced it, and that seems to be the case. But what it is a subjective rule, which includes, you know, intent. And intent for one human might be different for another human. So in all sports, there's subjectiveness when it comes to officiating, and the NFL is probably more so than maybe some of the other sports, to be honest, because it is so difficult. And we always say you can probably call a penalty on every play. So I think long term, if they want to go that direction, that's gonna hurt the product even more.
Yeah, and I guess you could make the argument that, you know, once you put the league, I don't want to say backing sports gaming because it certainly did not ask for this, but if it's going to have to be a part of it, that the clear and present thing to do is to make sure that you strive to get every call right with no tolerance for error here. I mean, you can't have it. Especially,
they're going to have error.
Especially in real time.
You always strive to get everything potentially right. And I thought, you know, I always say, I thought, and the news came out that Dean Blandino is going to be taking over the college replay system. But I always thought when he was in charge, it was very, very, very consistent. I think that's what you strive for. You might not agree with the rules. I tell you this all the time. But the way they called it when he was in charge was very, very, very consistent. I think that's the best you can hope for.
Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. John, what about some of the technology changing too? Because the way the sports gambling is going to go, there's a chance that there could be real-time TV. I mean, you know, all the deals that go with satellite delay and all that, but if you're going to have gambling, you might have to see it in real time.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that has to be sort of shaken out. I mean, there's always been network delays for reasons that obviously they don't want curse words going out over the air or things of that nature. But if you are going to have real-time betting, it's kind of hard to do that with a delay. So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered as this gets implemented. But from the NFL's perspective, as Mike mentioned, I mean, they fought this for years. They didn't invite this. I do ultimately think they will embrace it to make money off of it. But just because New Jersey is speeding ahead so quickly, and just because some other places might speed ahead, doesn't mean they have to speed ahead. They don't have to cater to outside people or outside sports books that they're not a part of. So I think people have to understand that as well. Just because they're going 100 miles an hour doesn't mean the league has to go 100 miles an hour.
And we talked earlier in the show about the ratings for the NBA being up, but ratings for football were down, baseball were down, other sports were down. And yet, if you had real time, John, you could say that it would keep the audience in place and fewer reasons to stray, since you're seeing it real time and you're looking for options before your next play-by-play bet.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I just don't think the audience is that great for that to make a large impact on the ratings. I think the general audience, which is far greater than the hardcore betting audience, is really far more impactful. In the NFL's, we constantly talk about this. You're right, the NBA's up and the NFL's down, but remember where they started from. So, I mean, one is still light years ahead of the other. So from their perspective, they're not panicking. And I think most of their issues with declining ratings have to do with the oversaturation of the product, has to do with the entertainment value of the product. I don't think it has anything to do with it being on a bit of a delay.
Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban, he brought this up last night, talking about the value of each professional sports team just doubled. I mean, these NFL teams are already in the billions. I mean, do the NFL teams feel the same way?
Well, it's going to go up, which is interesting because the Carolina Panthers are
that guy bought that team for $2.2 billion in cash.
Yeah, $2.2 billion, and arguably, if you waited a year, it could have spiked to far above that. But obviously, there were some issues off the field with Jerry Richardson that kind of forced that. Yeah, I mean, they're going to go up. But also remember those valuations, and everyone quotes Forbes like it's gospel. And that's what everyone bases all that on. You know, it's not real money. It's not like, I mean, the Carolina Panthers are worth $2.2 billion because David Tepper says he wants to pay that for them. You always need a buyer to buy into those numbers that Forbes throws out there. If you look at how normal businesses, say on the New York Stock Exchange, are evaluated, it's a little bit different. You have to have more sort of gross revenue and things of that nature. But the thing that makes the NFL and pro sports as a general such a solid bet, and it has been for years and years and years, is the television revenue. And I always talk about it. Until that goes away, this is a business you can't lose money in, and that's always a very desirable thing for a businessman.
Yeah. Now, one question, we talked a lot about replay and getting it right and all that stuff. What do you do in this situation? I mean, again, the league's didn't ask for this, but if they're going to embrace making money off of it, the other day in the Sixers game, for instance, the NBA came out and said they admitted that Aaron Baines fouled Joel Embiid, and that changed essentially it changed the betting line because Marcus Smart ended up making a free throw that changed everything. I mean, you're really putting in a lot of slippery slope with the way these things end up going. And I know it's not the league's job to make sure that Vegas or New Jersey or any other state, complies with this, but you're really leaving a lot of scrutiny. That would be the one interesting, I don't want to say downside to it, because I think it will be somewhat of a revenue stream, but when you are looking at the negative effects of this, that's got to be at the top of the list.
Well, I think what the NBA is trying to do there is just to be as above board as possible. I mean, nothing changes by admitting the mistake. You're not going to replay the game. And certainly in a situation where somebody gambles money on it and loses because of a particular play where there was an error made, they're going to be upset about it.
Right.
But there's nothing you can do about it. It's set. What you try to do is use it as a teachable moment and tell those particular referees that, look, you made a mistake here. You should have called a foul. It was a foul. And next time, you should do it. So I think that's the reason they do that, and they try to get it as right as much as they can. But that's what I was pointing out. Right. I mean, look at the strike zone in a Major League Baseball game. It will vary greatly from day to day, depending on the umpire. When you're dealing with human beings, you're going to have a lack of perfection, and there's no real way to fix that.
Yeah, that's that's an interesting point about the umpires, because that's something that is fixable by bringing in. I mean, we've seen documentaries and pieces.
Right.
Real Sports did the whole thing about the umpires and being able to basically get rid of them by having a electronic strike zone.
Well, yeah, when you can do that, I mean, if you embrace it, yeah.
Right.
There's no.
Now you can't do that in football.
There.
You can't do that in football and basketball where you have an electronic, something or another device calling fouls or throwing flags.
Correct, but there are certain things you can put a chip in the ball to correct spot errors in football, for instance. There's a lot of those that you could probably fix, but until the leagues embrace technology, and whether it's Major League Baseball embracing an electronic strike zone, or football putting a chip in the ball, as I said, to correct some of these spot errors. Until they want to do that, it doesn't matter. And they want the human element in the game. They think it's an important part of the game. I don't necessarily disagree with them. I don't know if I want an electronic strike zone over umpires. I think there's something to the ability to kind of feel how an ump is calling the game as a pitcher and try to take advantage of it, especially if you're a veteran. I think that's a big part of the game.
Well, and you'd still have a person there, John. I mean, the way that electronic system worked is that a guy stood behind the plate. It was just somebody up in the press box with a computer and a monitor that was in his earpiece saying ball, strike, and all that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you lose that part of the game where a Greg Maddux, for instance, could literally judge an umpire strike zone in the first inning and then just go an inch out and inch out and inch out.
Right, but if you're profiting off of the fact that gamblers are now betting on these games, isn't it hard to say that the umpire is giving a certain pitcher the benefit of the doubt on a pitch that's not necessarily a strike?
Well, and that's where I said that's where the human element comes in, and that's how that game has always been. So I think you lose some of the, and maybe a lot of the younger people don't care. You lose some of the romance of the game. You lose some of the strategy of the game.
Yeah.
I think, though, again, when we talk about the universe that watches games, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, hockey, whatever, I still think legal, illegal, it's a minority of people that are going to be betting on this game, on these games. And it's a significant minority. It's not like 51-49. You're going to have 95% of the people watching are not betting on the game. They're just trying to be entertained. And 5% of the people are going to be betting, maybe 10%, whatever the number is. I think that part of it is being overblown. I think people who want to bet on sports have already figured out a way to do it.
Yeah.
Like everyone jokes, people in New Jersey can finally bet on a sporting event. I know a lot of people in New Jersey who've been betting on sporting events
for years,
long before this happened. So
well,
I don't think it changes. That part of it, I don't think changes all that much.
Right, and we talked about this yesterday. Nick Huba, who covered the casino scene in Atlantic City, he's now the sports editor for the Press, said, keep in mind, only 5% of Vegas's revenue comes from that sports book.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's this. I don't know if you guys feel this way, but you can see it by some of the stories that, like, the majority of people are going to be betting on these games. I just don't agree with that. I don't see that.
Well, I think the hardcore bettor that constantly bets will probably stay with his guy. Don't you think?
Yeah.
If you're the guy who calls up and says, hey, give me 2 dimes on the Eagles 3.5, he's probably not going to the casino and spending the day there. That's more for...
And, of course, the difference is that if you're calling up your guy, he's going to float you that money that you're laying down until it comes time to collect. Whereas at a casino, you'd have to actually put the money down of what you're risking in your bet. You can't run a tab, so to speak.
And I think as we go forward, and I think, there's a legitimate, again, this might be years down the line, whether it's kiosks in stadium that makes it easier for people to bet. Maybe that will create an uptick. But I still don't think it'll be a drastic uptick. And it certainly won't affect how any of the leagues sort of legislate their games, other than making it more important to make sure everyone knows everything's above board. And I think that's part of the regulation aspect that the NFL has already admitted they're going to go to Congress for. There's a twofold to that.
To help them regulate
part of it. Also, they want to make sure they have their piece. And if there's regulation, it's easier to carve out their piece. So I think there's 2 issues to that. But I do not think that it will have a drastic effect, as I said, on how sports legislate their games.
A couple Eagles news and notes here. Give us some story on this Jay Ajayi story that you posted today at 97.3 ESPN.com, trashing the L.A. house. Is he like a la Nerlens Noel here?
Well, it was after the Super Bowl. He's getting sued for $25,000. And it was sort of an Airbnb thing that he was staying there for a week, told not to have parties. He's accused of throwing 3 parties, doing some damage, some smoke damage. I put that in quotes. You use that as you will. We all know what that means. But evidently the person that is suing him has kind of a reputation of suing people, and he's denied it. I don't think it will go anywhere. And even if he loses, he can afford $25,000. I don't think it's going to have a big impact on his career or the Eagles, other than, these stories keep happening, whether it's Michael Bennett, whether it's Darryl Worley, whether it's Jay Ajayi. I think the Eagles would like it to stop. I'll just say that.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, you can read more about that at 97.3 ESPN.com about Jay Ajayi. And then obviously this story is kind of interesting to me. Dean Blandino, maybe he didn't like TV so much.
Yeah, I don't know. As I said, I mentioned that before, he's going back to college. I don't know if that's going to affect his work on Sundays.
Oh, really?
I had heard that maybe he will do both. I haven't confirmed that yet. But he could end up doing both. And as I said, that was a big hit from Dean Blandino to Al Riveron. The league really, really struggled without him last year with consistency issues. And I know a lot of people don't like Dean Blandino from his days, especially here, from his days on the so-called party bus with the Cowboys. But that guy was awfully consistent. And as I said, people generally complained about calls during his era in charge of replay were really complaining about the rules themselves. They weren't complaining about how they viewed the replays.
If Al Riveron's not in, maybe the Eagles don't win the Super Bowl if Dean Blandino's the guy back in that office. Who knows, John?
No, they would have won the Super Bowl. They went back to the way Dean did it.
Oh, okay.
The problem was Al was overturning plays he wasn't supposed to overturn, and they kind of put the screws on him before the Super Bowl. So that actually helped the Eagles, because there is no doubt they would have overturned the Corey Clement play as they were calling it during the season. Zach Ertz, I think, was more of a 50-50 thing, but there's no doubt they would have overturned the Clement catch.
All right, John McMullen at JF McMullen. You can read his column on the NFL at getmoresports.com and his Eagles coverage at 97.3ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, guys.